let's look at censorship by some of the numbers. From January to August of 2023, ALA tracked 531 attempts to censor, targeting 1,915 unique titles. That's actually a 20% increase from the same time period in 2022, and it's the first time ALA has ever released mid-year statistics. In all of 2020, as you can see in the graphic here, ALA received 1,269 demands, which actually doubles the number since 2021. And since 2021, each year has actually seen an increase in the number of challenges, as well as the highest number of attempted book bans since ALA began compiling statistics 20 years ago. And remember, informal challenges or general inquiries generally are not recorded. So these statistics are actually small compared to the number of reconsideration requests or comments that we're seeing, especially at the public desk. Also of interest is public libraries so far in 2023 account for 49% of all challenges, as compared to 16% of the challenges for the same time period in 2022. So just to give you some historical context, we often see an increase in material reconsideration requests and challenges. They reflect societal anxieties. So during times of rapid societal change, book challenges become a political tool in the culture war. They also become a rallying cry to unify those in opposition to the changes that are occurring. For example, there was an increase in book challenges in 1940 to 1950 when we had McCarthyism, the rise of anti-communism, and the Red Scare, which eventually also spread into entertainment, industry, academics, and unions. In 1980 and 1990, which some of you may remember, we had the Satanic Panic, which combined moral panic plus a conspiracy theory. It started out with a few individuals who had concerns, and it was rapidly taken over as a political rallying cry that caused widespread fear. Interestingly, banned books weeks actually started in 1982 amidst that Satanic Panic surge. Generally, we see more requests for consideration, specifically at 2 developmental ages, when people are moving and changing a lot. So we see a lot for the 4 to 6-year-olds or those picture books, as kids move from kindergarten to 1st grade and they are learning to read by themselves independently without parental supervision, perhaps. These children are becoming more independent from their parents and more free thinking. Similarly, we see a rise in challenges as for books targeting the 14 to 17-year-old audience. That's as kids move from middle school into high school, and there's a lot of different developmental stages going on then, including puberty. These teens are definitely becoming more independent, and they also are more challenging to everything around them, including their parents. Historically and now, challengers often see their motivations as protective. They are going to take their time and their energy to support the community because they see the book as a symbol of community values. So it's actually less about the book and more about a concern for society. It's often communicated as a way to retain innocence. Basically, if kids or teens don't read about it, they won't know it exists. In truth, limiting young people's access to books or ideas with complex ideas doesn't prevent them from encountering those issues in real life. So let's talk about what's different with the challenges we're seeing now. Society has been becoming increasingly politically polarized, and it's really accelerated since about 2016, when we first saw it in the political debate. And reconsideration requests are really a lagging indicator. But as the first diagram shows, from a Pew study done in 2021, as a nation, we're becoming more divided. Those who identify as Republican or Democrat are moving away from middle and moving more towards the extremes or the edges of both of those parties. If you look at the second graph, you can also see that we're becoming much more divided on how to deal with the systemic changes that need to occur in our society. So the basic question that was asked is to ensure equal rights for all Americans, regardless of racial or ethnic background, how much change needs to occur. The golden brown is the percentage of the people that feel a lot of change needs to be done, whereas the gray blocks represent those who believe little or no change needs to occur. So we are divided politically along political lines about how much change needs to happen within society. This political polarization is really being driven by changes in societal demographics. So the two hot button issues are termed as critical race theory, which really comes down to how are we going to teach history to our children? If you look about the people entering elementary and secondary school, you can see that the demographics have changed a lot in just the last 10 years, which isn't even a generation. So in 2010, there were 53% of students entering in the fall were white, whereas in 2021, it was only 45%. That's where we get the phrase minority majority. While the white students are still the majority, if you take all the other ethnicities together, then white has become the minority. And this is leading to those challenges about or by of books about or by people of color. You see an increase in the number of students who are identifying as Hispanic, but also a significant increase in the people who identify as two or more races. So the future is really not going to look like the past or even the present, because this trend is going to continue. Another way to look at how the future is going to be different than the past is in sexual orientation or gender identity. And this in part gets to what we define as the family. If you look at the percentage of people who identify as queer, it's growing in each generation because it's becoming more socially acceptable to be true to yourself. And peer acceptance is also greater, which lowers the stigma and the feelings that you need to hide. And this really does matter and affect all impacts of life. Because remember, I mentioned the Red Scare of McCarthyism? It actually created a moral panic that's called the Lavender Scare, where people started attacking homosexuals within the government, thinking they were national security risks or communist sympathizers. Society is changing, and the future is not going to look like the past. Increasingly, since 2020, libraries, both public and school, seem to be part of this societal culture war. But it's really not new. When desegregation happened, there was a lot of focus on public schools, public libraries, and even public pools. Public pools were cemented in rather than be desegregated, and public libraries were closed. PEN America is calling what we're going through right now the edu scare or the education scare. It's a nationwide effort to foment anger and anxiety about the public education, to restrict and prohibit instruction about race, sexuality, and gender, and to ban books that address those topics. So we first saw a rise in book challenges where it hits a 21-year high. We saw Illinois legislature react by, quote, banning book bans. And most recently, we are seeing a reaction to that where we are the center of a wave of bomb threats. What makes what's going on today feel so different is the coordination allowed by social media and technology. So libraries right now have a motivated, coordinated, and vocal detractors. So why aren't we just withdrawing the books and making the changes that they ask? It really comes down to the core values of librarianship. We serve all community members, regardless of origin, age, background, or their views, regardless of how much money they have or how much political power they can wield. We believe that people have the right to both seek and receive information, and that libraries are in the business of providing information, not restricting it. And that's from all points of views and without regard to the origin, background, or views of the creator of the information. We also protect the right of privacy of the people seeking information. You don't have to out yourself as queer or the victim of domestic violence for us to allow you access to that information. It is literally not my business why you want specific information. So if you agree with those values, it's also time to admit that libraries are not neutral, especially public libraries. The very idea behind the existence of a public library isn't neutral. If I believe that a poor kid or adult should be able to read as many books as they want and not just how many they can afford, that's not a neutral position. I believe that every individual has the right to seek and receive information from all points of view without restriction. That's not a neutral position to hold. It's also literally the ALA's definition of intellectual freedom. Libraries believe that each person has the right to decide for themselves what they want to read, watch, or listen to. If a person objects to a book, they are free not to read it. That is their right. However, they do not have the right to prevent me from reading it. Libraries believe that books are windows into which people can see in experiences and mindsets that are different from their own. We believe that we should have books that are mirrors that reflect everyone, especially children, so they can see themselves in their own experiences. But also that books are sliding glass doors that readers can walk through into worlds of imagination and potential new realities. So by working in and supporting libraries, we've already chosen not to be neutral on the subject of censorship. Now, fear and anxiety really drive censorship, and we have to be very careful that our own fear isn't creating self-censorship, or what Kelly Johnson called quiet censorship. Kirsten Muma did a study of school libraries and discovered that if a queer book was challenged, that same library was 55% less likely to purchase another queer book the following year. And for each additional title that they received a challenge about, they were another 3% less likely to buy another queer book. It's natural and understandable to want to avoid conflict, but we have to resist. I've heard too many library workers say that so far their library hasn't really been impacted by the national movement, but when you dig deeper, you learn that they are intentionally not buying or not displaying or even not hand selling books because they are worried about triggering a challenge. And that means that your library has been impacted and your community is suffering. It's just that the fear and the censorship are coming from within the house. At this point, I think everybody understands that all libraries need to have a collection development policy. In my point of view, they should all include the Library Bill of Rights, the freedom to read, and the freedom to view statement. I think we all also know that libraries need to have a reconsideration process. It is important to explicitly state in that document, in that process, that we only accept challenges from our service population or our community. It's also very important that the steps that somebody needs to follow are clearly spelled out, and they should be easy to follow, and especially easy for staff members to remember even when they're under pressure. We also need to talk to our library boards, explain our processes to them, and answer any questions they have. It's important to talk openly about both your collection development policy and your reconsideration process. Some people view libraries as magical places, but how our books are selected and kept in our collection is not magic and it's not arbitrary. We are publicly funded organizations, and we are also in the business of providing information. So provide the information to the public. There's no need for secrecy, and we can personally remove the mystery this way. So, how do you handle a concern or a challenge that is brought to you? The best advice may actually be the hardest, which is first, just keep calm. So if you need, take a deep breath and don't panic. Have a plan before it happens. And maybe your entire plan is to pass it along to somebody else, and that's perfectly fine. Your plan is then to say, I'm sorry, but I can't help you. Let me pass you to the person who can. Here at Naperville, I have told everybody to give my card out to anyone. That can be your plan, is to pass out the card of the person whose job it is to address these. Or maybe you do want to start the conversation. If you want to have the conversation, be sure you give yourself permission to pause and plan an exit strategy for the conversation if you feel like you have quit making progress. For a hard reference question, we all feel free to say, I need to research this more. Let me get back to you. That is perfectly fine to say if somebody brings a concern about a book or a materials reconsideration to you. I need to research this more. Let me get back to you. Keep focused on the logic of the situation over the emotion. And I know that's hard to do, especially when you are being presented emotional arguments. It's even harder to do when you feel personally attacked. But remember, it's really not about you. They don't know you. If they call you a pedophile or a groomer, focus on the fact that they are repeating talking points. They don't know you. I would also say practice, practice, practice. Practice with your coworkers, with your boss, with your family. Ask them to take the role of the challenger, and you'll help build your confidence that you can handle these situations. Especially with everything in the news that's happening today, I think the first step is hard to remember, which is assume good faith. Really, these should be conversations where both sides learn from the other. Try to clear your mind of all previous transactions. And remember that each patron is an individual. Begin each transaction at the beginning. It is just like when you have to explain how to use the copier for the 20th time. Library workers have never really liked book challenges, but they didn't used to instill terror in us. It really is an issue of perception. It can be, is it a 6 or a 9? And both of us can actually be right. Keep the conversation focused on why. Explain why we create a collection for the whole community and how we do it. Explain that each individual decides what they read. And while this person, or even maybe yourself, may not enjoy the material or want to access it, somebody else might. And the library is here to serve everyone. Even explain about how we weed materials that no one uses. If our community wasn't interested in the item, we would weed it. Keep focused on the outcome and realize that the outcome can be, we agree to disagree. But I think what really scares library workers is people who come in that have an agenda. My first piece of advice is if the decision is not yours to make, pass it up the chain of command. You do not need to engage. But if you are the person who these requests and comments are getting passed to, the best piece of advice I have is to focus on logical arguments over emotional ones. Before you say anything, pause, breathe, and think. You need to practice. You need to read, think about your talking points, and you need to have an exit strategy in mind if things become too heated. They will have their talking points and you will have your talking points, and it doesn't need to get emotional. Now, their goal may be to cause drama and trauma, but remember, you are in control of yourself and your reaction. You can't control them, and you can't change their mind, but that is not really your goal. For me, it helps to build a separation between me as a person and them in my mind. Remember, you don't need to join them in their chaos. If they hurl insults or falsehoods at you about you as a person, remember the conversation is not about you. It is about the material under reconsideration and the library as an organization. I would also say focus on the person in front of you and that outcome. Don't start running the conversation forward in your head and think, but what if they say, or what if they do this? Don't catastrophize. Book challenges are rising exponentially across the nation. You as a person are not responsible for that, and you cannot single-handedly turn that tide. Focus on the person in front of you and what is happening, not what could happen or is happening elsewhere. I want to end on some good news. Public libraries often say that it is the parents' or guardian's place to decide what children should read. And a recent study done by Everything Institute and Book Riot says that the public agrees with us. The supermajority of parents say that they have never been made uncomfortable by a book their child has checked out from a public library, and that their child has never been made uncomfortable with a book they checked out. 92% of parents believe that their children are safe at the library, and that is the community we serve, and the majority does trust us. I want to end with a few further resources you can look at. In particular, Dave Pilkey made a video in 2014 that I think is perfect for explaining to the public the library's position. And if you don't understand or you want to understand better why people challenge books, I highly recommend Dr. Emily Knox's webinars, which have really helped me over the last few years. I'm happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you so much, Karen. If you have any questions for Karen, please put them in the chat box, and Shannon will take a look at those and jump in with the questions.
Sorry about that. We just had a story time announced over the overhead.
You are totally fine.
But I am back.
Karen, while we're waiting for some questions, this is Shannon.
Sure.
Can I ask, in all of your research and everything that you've done, is there anything as, you know, our role as librarians, we have one focus on all of the book bans that we're seeing in the challenges, but have you discovered anything as our role in our communities? You know, just outside of the fact that we're working in certain libraries, but what can we do as community members too to help with this?
Sure. So I think one of the best things that community members can do, especially if you work at a different library from the one that you live in the district, is pay attention to the library boards and show up to their meetings. Show support for the library staff and the library workers. And I don't mean by giving them small gifts, I mean by actually showing up and letting your voice be heard. I think part of the problem right now is that we have a silent majority of people behind us, and we really need them to be more vocal.
Thank you. Did you, is it okay to share this recording with the school district's librarians and others?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to make both my slides, and this recording will be available via Laconia. And you should also feel free to reach out to me. My email is in the slides.
Great, thank you. All right, if we don't have any other questions for Karen right now, then we will move on to our next presenter. If you have questions, sorry, something popped in and I cannot multitask. But if you do have questions during the next presentation or things come up, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll see them even if it's after the fact, and we'll address them. Or again, Karen shared her information on her slides, and you can always reach out to her directly if something comes up later. So thank you so much, Karen.
I will say, Matt just said in the chat that they shared the reconsideration process with their book clubs, and that's a great way to get it even farther out in the community. Like I said, talk to anyone and everyone who's interested. The more information people have, the better armed they are.
Thank you. All right, so I am going to move us on to our next presenter then, who is Julie Jurgens from the Mount Prospect Public Library. And Julie has been working with children and their families since 2001. She began her career in early childhood education and received her master's in library and information sciences with an emphasis on services for children and teens in 2006. She's worked at several libraries in different positions, including 6 years as a school outreach librarian and 4 years as an early literacy librarian. She's currently the assistant manager of youth services at the Mount Prospect Public Library. In addition to her library work, she is a musician, a storyteller, and a sporadic stand-up comedian. You can learn more about her work and her many, many opinions at himisjulie.com. And Julie's focus today will be on sharing how she has navigated tricky purchase requests. So I am going to hand it off to Julie now.
Excellent. That's very funny that you said him is Julie. It's hi, Miss
Hi,
Julie.
Miss Julie.
When I
Sorry about that, Julie.
No, when I got out of library school, blogs were the thing. Remember the day of blogs? I miss those days because everything else is a garbage fire. And an internet colleague of mine was like, him is Julie. What is that about? And I'm like, well, yeah, it's all run together. So, you know, kids come in, they say, hi, Miss Julie. And that's kind of where that came from. And now it's my online librarian identity. So I'm going to talk about I'm calling it conflicted collecting. It's kind of the flip side of what Karen was talking about, and I thank Karen for setting me up so well. You're going to hear a lot of repetition, but I think it's important repetition. I'm going to just set the stage for where I'm coming from. I am super biased, like every human being. I also, neutrality is not a virtue, it's cowardice. Libraries are not neutral, as Karen so eloquently told us. I don't think being offended is something to offending is not a great thing. It's not, and it's not equal to being dehumanized. There's a difference. And I think there is a right side and a wrong side of history. If you've never met me before or heard of me before, I have so many opinions and I'm very strong in them. And I am just one person, so take this all with a grain of salt. And I am going to say, I'm going to be very vulnerable in this presentation. So when you're hearing me state these opinions, if you feel rage or anger or upset, just imagine dorky little 4th grade me on the inside here being very kind of afraid and vulnerable. And I want to say that I'm going to be very just kind of out there because a couple of the tenets of white supremacy are fear of open conflict and assuming we have a right to comfort. We have no right to be comfortable. The world is very difficult for a lot of people right now. And if you have the privilege to feel like it's not going to impact you, that's not correct. So if you are saying like, well, that's not happening at my library, everything's fine, that just means the harm and damage is being done to people you might not be aware of. And again, fear of open conflict, a lot of things don't change because no one wants to say anything. Nice white librarians don't want other nice white librarians to be mad at them. And I am different. I am not here to make friends. I'm here to be on Survivor and survive the best way I know how and do the best I can by my community and my patrons. And just a little more context, so about the right and wrong sides of history. John Lewis was an amazing person who did a lot of great things, and eventually librarians kind of championed him. He wrote some great books, but you know, when he was a kid, he couldn't get a library card. Library cards were not for kids who looked like him. And he says, you also have a moral obligation to continue to speak up and speak out when something is not right and something is not fair. And just like we need our community members to speak up for us, we need to speak up to each other. If I can't tell you how many times I've heard librarians say, well, I'm not going to buy that book with a black boy on the cover because we don't have those kids here. Well, if that's your attitude, you probably don't see kids like that because they know they're not welcome in your library. And then I also will say, I don't like this quote: a truly great library contains something in it to offend everyone, which I think is true, because to be offended is to be upset, annoyed, or resentful. Like, and in the terms of the spectrum of feelings a human being can feel, upset, annoyance, resentment, they're not great, but they're not the most kind of extreme feelings or experiences a person can have. So I'm going to talk about Toni Morrison's reaction to having to read Huckleberry Finn in the 8th grade. So she said her experience with that book provoked a feeling I can only describe now as a muffled rage, as though appreciation of the work required my complicity in and sanction of something shaming. And Ernest Hemingway said, all modern American literature comes from Huckleberry Finn. Imagine these two authors sitting in the same 8th grade classroom. There's more than just a difference of opinion about the book. Toni Morrison, being exposed to that work, felt shamed, and she was emotionally segregated from Hemingway and any other white classmate who would be reading that book, because they would not be shamed by it. It's not the same experience. And I don't think muffled rage is the same as being offended or annoyed. And I could talk all day about Huckleberry Finn. If anyone wants those opinions, let me know. And again, I'm going to name check Rudine Sims Bishop, The Theory of Windows, Mirrors, and Sliding Glass Doors. Even if you don't see the brown and black kids or the queer kids in your community, I guarantee you they're there. And again, you're probably not seeing them because they're not seeing themselves in your collections or in your library, and they're not feeling welcomed. So, and I'll just share this great reaction of why representation is important. I don't know if anyone else's TikTok feed just became a stream of little black girls reacting to the recent live action remake of The Little Mermaid, but it was pretty much a solid week and a half of just coming across these videos and just sobbing, because it's so powerful to see yourself in media, to see yourself in a story, to have your experiences reflected back at you. And especially for children of color, to have that experience be joyful, you can't discount that. And these kids and their smiles are worth so much effort on our parts. So I'm talking about purchasing, but I'm actually going to talk about some tenets of weeding. If you don't know MUSTY, this delightful acronym, because we love those things in librarianship. And the mustiest thing I could think of was Agra from the Dark Crystal, so that's who that is. MUSTY is criteria for weeding materials from your collection. So if you come across materials that are misleading, ugly, superseded, trivial, irrelevant, or available elsewhere, that is grounds to weed those items from your collection. And I know librarians get really conflicted about some of the stuff I'm going to talk about, because I would never not buy a queer book or a book with a kid of color, but there are books that give me pause, and we are going to get into those. So let's think about, so if these are criteria for weeding, why would you buy any material out of the gate that fall under these categories? I am assuming everyone has heard about this book. This book is misleading. It has been debunked by science repeatedly. You're all library people, I hope. I hope there's no plants from safe libraries in here. You can look up how this book has been debunked. It is not accurate science. It is not vetted by anyone. And yet 11 editions are available in 841 libraries. I would also maybe argue that it's irrelevant. And again, just because it's not in a library collection, it doesn't mean it's not available. It does decrease access, but these books will be available elsewhere, even if they're not in your library collection. And this quote is from a Reddit thread about one of the board books I'm going to talk about in a little bit. If the library is safe for transphobic content, it's not safe for trans people. But I also think that, you know, in addition to our collection development policies and our weeding criteria, we are beholden to our communities, and we want to give them what they want. And so if you get patron requests, a lot of libraries, their collection development policy prioritizes patron requests. If there's interest from patrons, we're more likely to buy material. And I'm sure that's what happened in a lot of these situations. They thought there was a demand. And again, there's a lot of fear. And I will admit that I am afraid a lot of the time. Like, people can be scary. And I think it's because people are also scared. Like Karen mentioned, the world is changing. The world is changing so fast. I'm a Zennial. I'm on the cusp of Millennial and Gen X. So just in my lifetime, seeing how technology has changed, how society has changed, and it's going to keep changing. Our society is becoming more queer, more LGBTQ. That is not going to stop unless people who hold dehumanizing opinions get enough power that they can stop it and deny kids gender affirming care, or deny kids the ability to learn accurate facts about history and how we got to this point. So if we believe that stories are powerful, then these materials have an impact. But then also on the flip side, how many of you have been talking about looking for new employees and saying, I don't want someone to say they love books. I want them to say they love people. They love helping people. And so these people are also important. Think about the impact of these stories on patrons. The American Booksellers Association, for some reason, sent a bunch of boxes of books, this book, to booksellers. And imagine being a trans bookseller, opening this box and just seeing hundreds of copies of this book looking up at you that they didn't ask for. This stuff has real effects. So let's talk about the case of 2 board books. So I am a youth librarian, and my heart lies with children and teens and offering them what they need and protecting them. But a lot of this is applicable kind of across selection areas. So if you don't know what a board book is a smaller sized cardboard book designed for babies and toddlers. It's cardboard, so hopefully the baby, even if they have a couple of teeth, they can't destroy it too quickly. And that is who they are designed for. Children, infants, toddlers, simple books, simple concepts. So let's compare and contrast a couple of board books that came out in 2021. We have Global Baby Playtime. Baby faces are a standard genre of board books. Babies love to look at faces, especially other babies' faces. They are just fascinated. If you're going to have a core board book collection, you should have baby faces. You should have high contrast black and white books for infants who need that contrast. That is what you need. And so Global Baby Playtime was published by Charles Bridge. They've been publishing children's books since 1989. So as long as Taylor Swift has been alive, right? So that's a good chunk of time. Photographer Maya Mjera has been making children's books for 20 years. This board book is 16 pages because, again, babies don't have the longest attention span unless they are super geniuses plotting world over domination. And from WorldCat, there's one edition held in 408 libraries. That's just one statistic. That's not every holding in every library, but that kind of shows you the difference between Johnny the Walrus. So this is published by Daily Wire Publishing and Print, which started in 2021, so within the last few years. Matt Walsh, the author, is a TV personality who wrote his first book for children, ostensibly, in that same year. Kay Reese, the illustrator, doesn't seem to exist anywhere outside of this book. If anyone can track down Kay Reese and see if they're a real person, let me know, because it's like a Richard Bachman experience, or that Italian writer. I desperately need to know this illustrator's identity. This is a 30-page board book. Babies have short attention spans. Most picture books aren't even 30 pages, and picture books are designed to be read to, 3, 4, 5-year-olds and up. There are 2 different editions, and 183 libraries hold it. So it's not held as in many libraries, but it is still in, several, including, I will admit, my library. I chose to buy this book, and we had a lot of conversations about it because it was a patron request. And as a expert in children's literature and having a background in child development, like I said, that board book is not developmentally appropriate for the intended audience. The subject matter is not at an appropriate level. The illustrations are marginal. The reputation of the publisher is not one that you would immediately think, oh, this is where I go for children's books. But when you have a patron request, and sometimes when you have repeated requests from the same patron, you start to think about things, or at least I did. And I thought, sometimes the tenor of the conversations led me to think, okay, if I don't purchase some of these items, then will this turn into, well, if I can't have what I want in the collection, I'm going to start challenging stuff that is in the collection and get it removed. And this is kind of where our right to comfort comes in for me. And a lot of this is very, very personal. I don't like being yelled at. I don't like being made uncomfortable. I don't like having to say no, but I am in a much better position to deal with the upsetting rhetoric and assumptions and misguided thoughts of certain people than, say, a queer kid, because I would rather hear this stuff from these patrons and basically do what I feel I have to do to make sure that, you know, trans and queer kids aren't hearing this. This is from the Trevor Project 2023 survey. In the last year, 41% of young queer people considered dying by suicide. That is a serious, real consequence of what these materials are pushing. And Johnny the Walrus is not the only book that is basically a complete misrepresentation of the trans experience. If you're not familiar with Johnny the Walrus, it is about a kid who likes to play pretend. And well, suddenly one day the internet people decide that he has to stay a walrus because he pretended to be a walrus one time. And anyone who knows anything about you know, being a trans person and what they experience and what they go through, that is not how any of this works. So this is misleading. Even though it's a fictional story, it is misleading, and in my opinion, harmful. So like I said, I did buy this for my collection because I didn't want to have patrons getting to the point where they were so upset about not getting what they wanted that they were going to go after affirming materials that could, you know, help trans kids feel good about themselves and their place in the world. So when trans kids live in a place where they have respect for their pronouns and they are respected, that reduces their risk of harming themselves. And I think buying a book that I feel is uncomfortable and not appropriate for my collection to maybe mitigate the harm that is going to be done to these kids, that was a choice I made. And I don't always feel great about it. I have fielded questions from all kinds of people in my library wondering, why do we have this? And I have to explain myself. But it also makes me think of, there is I don't know if this video will play, but I am a nerd. I love Star Trek. This is Star Trek Deep Space Nine, one of my favorite series. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. This is one of their best episodes. In this episode, there's an arc. Captain Sisko has basically violated his ethics. He has, you know, contracted for murder, done a ton of terrible things that he is not happy about, but he did it for a greater good. And I'm going to see if I can get this to play for you because it is amazing. All right, we're going to skip ahead. Can you guys hear it? All right. So I will have to do a dramatic reenacting because the sound is not coming through. So he says, I did all this terrible stuff, but one of his crew members says, you know, this is all worth it if we can save billions of lives from being lost in this war that we're fighting. And he ends by saying, I can live with that. I can live with that. And I've also gotten to the point where it won't go to the next slide. Sorry, this is embarrassing. All right. And I would say that, you know, my guilty conscience about buying this book is a small price to pay to make sure that trans and queer kids have access to books that affirm their experiences and make them feel seen. And now is, and like Karen, I will share all of this so you can click on these links. But now, if there are any questions or comments, I am ready to engage.
Thank you, Julie. While we're waiting for questions to come in, I'll just say I really appreciate your sharing your feelings in general about having to purchase books or feeling like it's the right thing to do to purchase books that you also find really problematic. Because I've been in that position as a selector myself, where it feels so wrong to put this in the collection, but then if you don't, what are you maybe opening up by deciding to take a firm stance on that?
Yeah, and it's because I think all of us do want to serve our communities. And I, again, like with book challenges, I always assume the best intent. I always assume, even if I don't agree, I assume that they're coming from a place where they feel that they are protecting their child and making, you know, trying to craft a world that they are comfortable having their child live in. And it's almost, I feel upset that they've been misguided so much, and they're going to end up doing things that will harm their children, because there are it's very likely that one of their own children is queer, and this kid's going to grow up with this. So it's a really hard balancing act. I remember earlier in my career, I came out of a you know, early childhood background, and I wanted to weed all of the Baby Einstein DVDs because screen time for babies is just not okay. And I was trying to do this before the lawsuit came out where Disney got sued because those DVDs were found to contribute to language delays. But people wanted to check them out so much. The marketing had gotten everybody thinking, like, I need Baby Einstein so my baby will be smart. And how can you fault a parent who wants their baby to be smart? Like, that's a good intention, but there's not enough knowledge about what this stuff does. And so as librarians, it's walking that fine line between, you know, being experts and being curators, but also being beholden to our community and wanting to give them what they want. And yes, our Johnny the Walrus is up on the second floor in political satire, I believe. So I'm also a big believer in cataloging as a tool, and you can use it to and again, it's the same thing. I give side eye to people who put and Tango Makes Three in the 600s, but here I am putting a board book that is not for children in the 800s. So it is very complicated, and it's not easy. But I think, you know, if you go back to librarians aren't neutral, libraries aren't neutral, and you have to be able to live with yourself at the end of the day and what you prioritize. And I always prioritize the kids. So any advice to people who work in libraries where they aren't necessarily handling direct challenges, but don't want to remain neutral in it either? So if you work in a library, if you want to do that work in your organization, I would just say have conversations. Our organization has had talks about, like, it's not secret when people request reconsiderations or what we're buying. I think just having an open dialogue. I will talk to anybody. I've had, you know, several different people ask me about these materials, and I just tell them, you know, what I said. And I think also just being vocal in your own life, talking to your friends and family about what's going on. I'm wanting someone to make a stronger connection between these bomb threats to libraries and the systematic dismantling of essentially democracy. Like there's high stakes here, and I think people just don't know. There's not enough word getting out to just the average person that this is happening at their own libraries. So I think the more you can talk about it, I've been on stage in dive bars at like 11:30 p.m. and I've talked about libraries. Like, never stop advocating and giving that information, because if people don't know what's happening, they're not going to be able to do anything. And I think a lot of it is just a lack of awareness, because again, there's a lot of fear that library, administrators, they don't want to anger the vocal, angry minority, but by giving into them and not pushing this stuff and letting people be aware, they're disenfranchising the majority of people who, would want to fight back against censorship. I've had children ask me, I had a 4th grader ask me, like, what's up with all these book banning conversations? And I just this kid, and their adult was there. I kind of looked at their adult, like, can I talk to your kid about this? And I told this 5th grader, and she's like, wow, that's not great. What can I do? And I said, well, here you can, send a comment to our board. You can go to a board meeting. So the more we talk about it, the less of a secret it is. The episode of DS9 is In the Pale Moonlight, and you should just watch all of DS9. It's great. It's excellent science fiction. But yes, I think any other questions, or we're doing a group watch soon.
Just in case there are any other questions while we're kind of like wrapping up, I do want to kind of mirror what a couple people have said about, and just thank you for your expertise, but also for your vulnerability and talking about, just how sensitive and difficult and everything that goes into making these decisions and navigating what is really, really difficult. So thank you for all of that today. Oh, there is one more question. Any advice for when someone submits a purchase request but doesn't want to put the item on hold? They just want it to be available for other people to browse.
Oh yeah, so that's what we do. Is if someone wants it, we assume they want to read it personally, and like our standard practice is to put it on hold for them. And so it would depend on the material. Like if they don't want it enough to put it on hold, we would look at it and say, do we think there's enough demand elsewhere in the community for this? If we don't think there is, and it's available through interlibrary loan, we might go back to that patron and say, we're not seeing enough of a need for this. It is available to borrow from other libraries. So we could probably do that. And then, inevitably go down the path of, what they want to do and how much they want to push it. But yeah, that's my recommendation. Like, see if it's worth adding to the collection in other for other reasons.
Thank you again, Julie, for
You're welcome.
your presentation. So I am going to bring us now to Stacy Whitman, who will be concluding our presentations for today's program. So concluding our event today, we are joined by Eisenhower Public Library's Director, Stacy Whitman. With over 28 years of experience in the library field, Stacy began her career as a library page and worked her way up the library ladder, gaining valuable experience in various public desk positions, including circulation clerk, reference librarian, head of reference, and now director of the Eisenhower Public Library. Stacy has been leading Eisenhower for 9 years and was recently featured in the 2022 American Libraries magazine in an article titled Uptick in First Amendment Audits. Join us as we welcome Stacy and learn about how she and her team have handled their experiences with First Amendment auditors. Welcome, Stacy.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone who's joining us today, and to my co-presenters. Those were fabulous presentations. Mine is not going to be that interesting, or it's really going to be a lot of legal stuff, unfortunately, but it's important legal stuff. So I want to share some information about First Amendment audits today, what the background is on them, what the rights of auditors, staff, and other patrons are in the context of a First Amendment audit, how we do things here at the Eisenhower, and what our experience has been with First Amendment audits. So first of all, what is a First Amendment audit? I think we tend to think of these, especially in the context of library First Amendment audits, as being primarily a conservative objective, but they can come from both ends of the political spectrum. A lot of people employ First Amendment audits to hold police officers accountable for their actions, which, I think we're all very familiar with those, and I think that they've had varying degrees of success in their objectives, but that's an example of something that might come from a different political perspective than we might be used to or think of. They're used to test public employees and their knowledge of First Amendment rights, and specifically with regard to rights of expression. That's why it falls under the First Amendment. So a First Amendment audit generally consists of a person coming into a public space like a public library and recording in that space in a very obvious way. The point is to challenge their right to film or record in a public space. If the auditor awards an institution or a place a passing grade, that means that they were able to record unencumbered and they weren't approached in a negative way or asked to stop recording by an employee. And those receiving a failing grade, an employee in the institution may have asked the person to stop recording or given a negative reaction to the person who is recording. Sometimes these auditors will engage in goading behavior with employees. So, they might call them names, trying to get a reaction from them, maybe try to get in their way or get up in somebody's face. And once they receive a negative reaction to those behaviors, then again, that institution might receive a failing grade. And in those situations, the auditor will cast themselves as sort of a teacher of First Amendment rights, and ironically, to people who work in a library setting. I always find that kind of amusing that they think they're teaching us about First Amendment rights, but that's their right. So they will post it with a failing grade and talk about how they have taught or hopefully taught a lesson to the people working in that institution. Let's talk a little bit about how they started. So their early ones might be dated to the mid 2000s, perhaps earlier, and they were mainly initially intended to record police officers and hold them accountable for their actions with interactions with citizens. And that intention has, of course, expanded. It's including now a variety of public places, including police stations, post offices, parks, and of course, public libraries. Now, the First Amendment does cover recording in public spaces, and those rulings from courts are often based on the rights of media to record and report events. So let's talk a little bit about the rights of a First Amendment auditor. It's the right to record in a public space or in areas where people have a legal right to be present. They have the right to record employees performing their jobs. And they have the right to disseminate that information in whatever means they see appropriate. So either through publication, through sharing, posting to social media. That's kind of the main way that we find them. But you do see like people sharing things on Facebook or, other social media platforms. There are some limitations to these rights. And these can be a little tricky to kind of decipher or understand. There's a lot of there's a lot of case law surrounding it. So libraries are considered by courts to be limited public forums. And that means very essentially, that they can establish rules that limit expression to the library's mission and purpose. Now, courts have established that a library's mission and purpose is to aid in the acquisition of knowledge through reading, writing, and quiet contemplation. And I'm quoting from a decision from the Third Circuit Court. And that was in a lawsuit brought by a person experiencing homelessness against the Bureau of Police for the town of Morristown, New Jersey, where the person who was filing a suit was saying that the library had violated their First Amendment rights because they had asked the person to leave on a number of occasions for various reasons. And so the courts issued that decision about what the purpose of a library is in that specific case. The rules must meet a reasonable time, place, and manner restriction. So there are various levels of restrictions that different types of forums need to comply with. And for this, in the case of libraries, they must meet this reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions test, and it must be viewpoint neutral. So an example of that is a library can establish a rule saying that people cannot collect signatures for a petition on library grounds. But when you do that, you have to apply it from a viewpoint neutral standpoint. So you cannot say, for example, that someone can't stand in your lobby collecting signatures on a petition to expand library hours, but then allow someone who's running for the board to collect those signatures within the library or library grounds. You have to apply that standard uniformly. So while libraries can establish these rules based on, these parameters, with First Amendment audits, it's often difficult to enforce these rules because the auditor will always push back. That's the whole point. And they'll do that for a few different reasons. First of all, the point is to kind of create a conflict because they want a lot of times more views, more clicks, donations, so that they can make some money. But also because they firmly believe in many cases that institutions like libraries do not have the right to establish these rules. I'll be honest, this whole limited public forum thing and the various types of forums is pretty complex. It's hard for me to understand in a lot of cases, and I am a library director and have been in libraries for a few decades. I don't really expect that a lot of other people are going to understand these parameters and what they mean. So it's not surprising to me that someone would say, no, you can't tell me I can't film in this library. I have the right to do so. So it's just something to bear in mind. You can establish rules, but they are hard to enforce. So let's talk about the rights of staff members. And unfortunately, there aren't that many in this case, in the context of a First Amendment audit. Essentially, auditors cannot film in areas designated to be staff only or in areas where there is a reasonable expectation of privacy. So for example, restrooms, that people have a reasonable expectation of privacy in restrooms. They cannot film in restrooms. And like I said, they can't film in staff only areas. So it's very important to designate those areas as being staff only. And you also, auditors cannot interfere with your ability to do your job. So they can't, for example, obscure your computer screen if you're trying to sign somebody up for a program. They can't stand between you and a shelf if you're trying to shelve a book. That's pretty much the extent of staff members' rights. Auditors do have the right to record you while you're doing your job, is the bottom line. What are the rights of patrons? Again, few, and meaning other patrons within this context. So patrons still have the right to read, watch, listen, and to not have someone observe what they're checking out, what they're reading, what they're watching. So their right to that privacy is not superseded by the auditor's right to record in a public space. And like I said, in most cases, challenging someone who is recording in a library is often, maybe not always, but quite often, met with resistance. And the more an employee challenges an auditor, the longer they're going to stick around. So you kind of have to think about, in the context of this, what is your objective here? Is it to really take a stand on something, and sometimes that's appropriate and sometimes you have to, or is it to try to get them out of the building as quickly as possible and without as much fuss as possible? Employees challenging a recording auditor, it garners more views and attention. So, those people are always going to get more attention to a video that has some sort of contentious interaction with an employee than ones that nothing happened. They walk through, they film some stuff. They saw an employee who said, "Hi, how can I help you?" And they said, "Oh, I'm good." Or, "Hey, what do you think of this?" And the employee answered, and then they went about their, that's not exciting. That's not interesting to people. So that doesn't get as many views. Also, and this is the sad and really kind of it's scary, but supporters of an auditor may retaliate against libraries that challenge an auditor through harassing phone calls and messages, things like that. Again, it's something to be aware of. If you have to challenge someone, it's not to say don't challenge someone who's recording if they're doing something that's inappropriate because you're afraid of doing this. But it is very unpleasant. It's just anecdotally, I know of this happening in some libraries where they have gotten phone calls and emails from people who have been incensed by what they've seen in an audit video. So it's something to be aware of. And as we've recently discovered and probably understood, but this is, proof of it, it's very difficult to track people down when they're sending communication electronically or even when they're making a phone call. So just be aware of that. So how do you handle preparing or handle a First Amendment audit? What do you do in advance? What can you do? So for administrators and department heads, it's really important to check in with your trustees and make sure that they understand what a First Amendment audit is. A lot of people have never heard of it. My brother called me this morning while I was getting ready for work, and he's like, what are you doing? And I said, hey, I'm giving this presentation this morning. And he was like, First Amendment audit. And I said, do you not know what that is? He's like, I've never heard of this in my entire life. And he's in his, 60s now. So, just like, not everybody knows about it. So don't assume that even if your trustees or library trustees that they know about it. It's a good idea to check in. It's also a good idea if your budget allows it to check in with your legal counsel and just get advice or guidance ahead of time. They would be the ones who would be defending your library if someone brought a lawsuit. And so they're probably prepared for something like this or have been preparing. And so get their input on it. Just check in. Also, review your policies on recording in the library. When we reviewed our policies only covered staff recording library events. We didn't have anything talking about what types of circumstances we allowed or didn't allow people to record if they were members of the public. So it's important to review those. It's also very, very important to tell your staff what your expectations are. Make sure they know what a First Amendment audit is. Make sure they understand what it consists of. And tell them what you want to have happen or what your board says they want to have happen. Talk to them, talk to your department heads, and explain to them when they should back off and explain to them the circumstances under which you would expect them to enforce rules that you've established. So also explain FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, because a lot of times auditors will come in and say they are requesting information under the Freedom of Information Act. Well, you want to make sure that your staff members know what a FOIA request is. Not everybody does, and not everybody understands how it works. Encourage questions from staff. A lot of times, this subject matter can be difficult to talk about. It's scary for a lot of staff. It's scary for a lot of administrators, but those are the things that you do have to have conversations about so that everyone knows what your expectations are, how they should behave, what they can do to protect themselves if necessary. It's important to have those conversations and, encourage those scenario-based questions. If your staff, what happens if they try to do this? What happens if they try to do that? What do we do? Make sure you talk to them. Make sure that you've prepped by establishing signs for staff-only areas. When we did kind of a sign audit of the building, we realized that we didn't have signs in all of the staff-only areas. So we made temporary ones. We're going to have permanent ones made, but just type out a sign that says staff only or authorized personnel only and laminate it and stick it on the door. That's enough for the time being, at least. Make it look nice later. You also probably want to communicate with your local police, just, to make sure that you're on the same page with regard to how you would like them to support you should something like this happen. And I know that, we have, in our community, we kind of have a little bit of not a difficult relationship with them, but, we are weighing our options when something happens, whether or not we want to call the police, because sometimes their response is not exactly going to help a situation. But in cases like this, you might need them to back you up. So it's important to talk to them and find out how they would respond and what they would expect from you. You might also want to post signs alerting patrons to other people's right to record in public spaces, just to kind of prep them for the eventuality if they're in the library and they're picking out books and they see somebody who kind of passes over them and, you know, points a phone or a camera at them. It might be a good idea to just post a sign letting people know that they could be recorded. For frontline staff, try to be as proactive as possible. You know, you cannot control what your administrator or your department heads tell you, but you can, and this is said in earlier presentations, you can only control your own actions. So, you know, try to be proactive in asking questions of your department heads or your administrator to see what the expectations are. Review your policies and see if you might have any questions about what they say. Learn a little bit about FOIA because of an auditor might ask. And it's a good idea to know who your FOIA officer is in your library. Every library has to have a FOIA officer, and know how to request a FOIA. So, you know, the law states that FOIAs don't have to be written on a particular form, but a lot of libraries do have forms that they can provide to people as a template to help them when they're formulating their FOIA request. But they don't have to use that form. They can, our old business manager used to say, they can write it on a napkin and hand it to me, and that's perfectly legal. But it cannot be a verbal request. It has to be writing, either, you know, physical or electronically. You essentially, the message I would like to send is that you have the right to information that you need to do your job. So if you have questions about how to behave in a situation like that, you have the right to ask it, and you have the right to that information. So, you know, in a sense, you kind of have to advocate for yourself if you're not getting that information, and it stinks that it might fall on you, but that's sometimes the reality of it. So handling a First Amendment audit, what to do when it actually happens. I cannot tell you how your library wants you to behave. This is how we do it, or how we've decided to handle it here. So staff members are to tell me immediately, tell our person in charge. We always have a designated person in charge in the building, and tell our security staff. If I'm not in the building, I ask them to call me at home. Essentially, let them record. Do your best to just let them go about their business and do their thing. It's better if you can just let them do what they want to do and let them walk out the door. That's the objective. Get them in and out as quickly as possible. Offer respectful, friendly help if asked, but there's no need to approach them unless it's the common procedure in your library. Here, you know, we kind of will say hello, we'll make eye contact, but we let people go about their business until they ask us for help, unless they obviously look like they need help. And we all know what that looks like. But if they don't approach you, there's no need to approach them. You see somebody holding up a phone or a camera, you probably know what they're doing. So just let them be. If they come to you and ask you a question and you don't know something, get back up. Ask your colleague, call someone at a different service desk, call your department head, call another senior colleague, whoever you need to bring in. And it's easy to freeze in these situations and kind of forget what you know. That's totally normal. So it's fine to say, I don't know. It might feel uncomfortable to be recorded while saying, I don't know, but it's better to say that and to get someone as backup than to offer incorrect information. Just say you don't know and get somebody to help. And that way you'll have somebody with you too. So that's what I tell my staff. If this is big for me, especially, and I'll be a little bit vulnerable here in a bit, but if you don't want to be recorded, go to a staff area. That's what I tell my staff. I don't expect you to stay at your station if you feel uncomfortable. Go. I don't care if people are standing around and you think they might need help. Go. Someone else can help them. So just go to a staff only area immediately and stay there. Let people know what's going on and just wait it out. If you have to intervene, make it a behavioral issue. So for example, approach the person and say, I'm sure you didn't know, but we don't allow blank. So whether that's loud use of profanity, patrons in staff only areas, looking at what others are reading or checking out, address the behavior, do not address the recording, because the problem actually is not the recording, it's the behavior. So essentially, I tell people, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. I mean, that's all you can really do. It may be inconvenient. It may produce anxiety. And here's how I kind of offer them the option of reframing the situation in their heads. I'm sorry, I didn't switch my slide over. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst, but also consider that they are exercising their rights as a citizen. They literally do have the right to do this. As much as it causes anxiety or stress, try to reframe it in that context. Like, it is their right to do this. So I want to share our experience, which is a little different, because this came in the context of the height of the pandemic. I think this happened in December of 2020. And essentially, this person was challenging our ability to establish a masking policy and require that everyone in the library wear a mask. So this person walked around the library without a mask and was recording the whole time. I believe it was my head of reference who spotted him first and called me, and I came down and we kind of talked about it. So we approached the man and, said, excuse me, I'm sure you didn't realize this, but we do require that everyone in the building wear a mask. We can get you one if you don't have one with you. And he said, no, I'm not going to do that. I want to stress that he was calm. He was not offensive in his vocabulary. But at that time for us, this was before there were any sort of, vaccines. And we felt it was a very serious health and safety issue. So we had to intervene in this case. We asked him a few times. We explained that, yes, in fact, we do have the ability to establish reasonable rules. And there was a statewide masking mandate. And he continued to challenge it. So we said, okay, we're going to go ahead and call the police. And we did. And they said they weren't going to do anything because we were not sure if we wanted to sign a trespass warrant. So I called our attorney, and his advice was to let this man just do whatever he was going to do today. Get him out of the building as quickly as possible. The longer you challenge him, the longer he's going to stay. Just get him out. So that's what we did. I went around and I communicated this to staff because understandably, everyone was kind of upset that there was someone in the building without a mask. And I said, if you feel that your personal safety is at risk, please go into a staff only area. You do not have to help this person. Totally get it. We're just going to try to let him do his thing and have him leave. So eventually he did leave, and he saw the police come. He saw that they didn't talk to him. And when he posted the video, he declared it to be the police had upheld his First Amendment rights because they said that they would not intervene. So that's great. He came back, still refused to wear a mask. And this time our attorney said, okay, go ahead and call the police and tell them that you will sign a trespass warrant. So the police arrived and they spoke to him and they did de-escalate the situation. But weirdly, he had a cast on one of his arms and was not able to be handcuffed if he was going to be arrested. So he opted to leave instead of being arrested. But he left. So that was what we wanted to have happen, essentially. So what did we do right? Well, we pretty much always follow legal advice. So once we received that advice from our attorney, we communicated to staff that we would let the person be in the building with no mask, and we advised them to go to a staff only area if they were concerned for their safety. When the staff did interact with him, they were always respectful, friendly, and helpful. Many staff members offered him a mask and he refused, and they just said, okay, and they put it away. And I think part of that is because the department heads and I had really prepped staff to say, don't challenge the recording, challenge the behavior, and let them record. The recording part of it never came up. It was all about the mask. So I feel that we really did that correctly, and that the staff were very respectful, friendly, and helpful when he did ask a question. What could we have done better? We could have been more prepared for a challenge of this nature. I mean, we had gotten people complaining about masking throughout this period of time. I should have seen it coming, that someone was going to come in and record this event, and I just didn't. I missed it. We also didn't communicate with our local law enforcement, so we didn't know how they would or wouldn't support us in this situation. And we definitely should have done that. So final thoughts on this. For administrators and department heads, if you think you're prepared, prepare more. Just keep doing it. I can tell, I can talk to my staff members about this, and a couple months later, they're like, can you please tell us about First Amendment audits and FOIA requests again? And I'm just gonna, every month I do, well, I did this prior to the pandemic, and we just started up again recently. I would do a Snacks with Stacy. And so I would meet with every department and talk about like what the board talked about, what we've been talking about in department head meetings, and allow them the opportunity to ask questions or tell me any concerns that they had. And we started that up again. So I'm just going to put that on my agenda for every meeting. Let's talk about First Amendment audits. Let's talk about FOIA. People forget, people get nervous, they will forget. And, it's never a bad idea to revisit this information and allow your staff to ask questions. For staff members in general, learn from it. If it goes badly, learn from it and try to move on. Don't beat yourself up. Don't blame or judge each other for your actions. You don't know exactly how you're going to react in a situation like this until it happens, and allow yourself space to recover. There are also like unexpected outcomes. So like people who don't enjoy or feel very strongly about being recorded without permission. I'm one of those people. And it actually, like, I hate my picture. I will not be in a picture. I will take a picture of all of my staff members and then some before I'm ever in a picture. I hate it. I hate being recorded. I hate seeing myself. And when I felt like it was my responsibility to watch the video after it was posted, I was devastated. Like, I think it happened on like a Friday. I did not leave my house all weekend. I couldn't. So like, and I'm sure that other people will have strong reactions because of other things that happen during a First Amendment audit. It's really important to give yourself space to feel whatever you're going to feel and try to assess what is going to help you get through that experience. Try to ask for help if you have trusted people in your life in a support system. I think it's really important to do that. And that's pretty much all I have. So.
Thank you, Stacy. I know, at the beginning of your presentation, you talked about how it wasn't flashy or interesting, but I think this is one that has been in the back of our minds a lot as we've seen more and more of it happen, and it's happened to a lot of us. So thank you for that information. There are a couple questions it looks like came in during the presentation. One, someone says, I was told that Illinois allows folks, library users, not staff, that are being recorded, even in public spaces, to deny the photographer.
That is not my understanding, but I would definitely check with your attorney. Now, again, you can establish local policies, and I don't know if something, here's the thing, a lot of like the library as a public space in the context of First Amendment audits has not been tested in court. So you can establish rules, but those rules might be challenged in court. You could be a test case. So whether or not someone can say, no, I don't want to be recorded, I can't tell you for sure that that's true. It's my understanding that it's not. If you're in a public place, you kind of tacitly give your permission to be recorded or to have your picture taken.
Right.
But check with your attorney.
And then someone else asked if you have any advice for if they are filming children in particular. I know this comes up at our library a lot every time we talk about it.
This is a really tough one. And we actually do have it in our policy that minors cannot be recorded without the permission of a parent or guardian. But again, hasn't been tested. So what we've discussed in our library is let the caregiver express their desire for the situation. You know, if they have a problem with it, they can tell us, or they can tell the person, stop filming my child, stop taking a picture of my child, or whatever. And they can come and tell us. There are a couple of different ways you can go about it. You can take the parent or caregiver aside and say, you know, here's the situation. If you're uncomfortable with this, maybe it's a good idea for you to step into the bathroom. I can knock on the door and let you know when they're gone. We can hold your materials if you want to come back later. I can even give you a call and let you know when they're gone, and you can come back. If they do not want to do that and they insist that they want the person to stop recording, honestly, I would pull the person aside and say, look, this person is really uncomfortable with this, with you paying this kind of attention to your child. Do you want to be that person who is recording someone's child without their permission? How is that going to look for you? That's pretty much what I would say to them.
Yeah.
But it's a tough call, honestly. So I'd be interested to hear what the conversation is at your library too about this.
Yeah, I don't know that we have really necessarily come up with a solution. Because it's a lot of hypotheticals, right?
Mhm.
I think everybody immediately goes to like a worst case scenario. Like there's a story time and somebody's filming in the story time and the parents aren't around. What do you do? As I know, one of the questions I've been asked, and I mean, our general philosophy is exactly what you've said. You don't address the filming. You don't draw attention to it. You help them as if they were anyone else. We had a First Amendment auditor in our library a couple months ago, and it was very brief because we gave no attention to it, asked him if he needed help. He walked around the building quickly and then immediately left because we didn't draw attention to any of it. So I think that's part of it. I think Julie mentioned if they're focusing on a specific patron, that veers into harassment, which, you know, I think to what you were saying, Stacy, that's the behavior that you're addressing then, as opposed to the filming. And then Lisa commented in the comments, it was in response to the kind of the first question about a user saying, don't film me, and kind of how them saying they have not given permission, how does that apply to their privacy versus the library's legal rights?
Yeah, that's a tough question. And again, it's my understanding that, like, for example, if you are in a park and someone is filming or taking a picture, you don't have to give your permission. They can do it. And it's my understanding that that's generally the case. But again, check and see. Again, in those cases, I would probably take the person aside and say, look, this is happening. The longer we argue with this person, the harder it's going to be to get them to leave us alone. So if you want to come back, I can give you a call and let you know. And if the person is adamant that they have a right to be there, which they do, I would probably say to the person recording, you know, this is creating a disturbance in the library right now. You can film, that's fine, or you can record, but you're creating a disturbance with your behavior with this specific person.
Yeah.
We need you to move on. Like, record somewhere else in the building. That's what I would say.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I don't see any other questions in there, and I know we're a little over our 11:30 time. So I'm gonna start wrapping us up. So I just want to say once again, thank you everybody for joining us today, but a special thank you to all of our presenters for sharing their time and their expertise on today's panel. I know the library landscape and the challenges that many of us in libraries are facing has shifted so dramatically in recent years. So I hope that today's presentation, you were able to take something away and maybe feel a little bit less alone in facing the challenges and get a little bit of good advice for how to stay calm and navigate them in the future. If you enjoyed today's program, please consider another. Laconia offers them all year round. You can visit laconia.net to see all of the upcoming programs Laconia has planned. And please consider joining us we have part 3 of a series with Michelle Peterson that is taking place on December 1st in Mount Prospect on dealing with challenging situations. Michelle focuses on dealing with difficult situations using a not who but how philosophy. And even if you've missed the previous programs in her series this year, we still encourage you to join us. She's very energetic and engaging, and her program in December will include a brief overview of the first 2. And I think that is all from us today. Again, thank you to all of our presenters and everybody who attended. We appreciate it. We will send out the recording after the fact. And if you have questions or things that came up for our presenters, feel free to reach out to us or directly to them. And I'm sure they will be happy to answer them. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.